Hello and welcome. I'm Katy Jo, founder of Healing Arts Shaman School, and just wanted to pop on here today and say hello. And in particular, I wanted to talk a little bit today about the intersection of shamanism and mental illness. And actually, I'd like to begin by sharing a little bit about my journey with mental illness. So, when I was younger, I went through a lot of the same things that many of us have gone through around navigating depression and having big feelings as a teenager and having some unresolved trauma that was deeply buried, and also just trying to figure out who I am and how I fit in the world. And in that process, I also was and have always been a pretty sensitive person. Sensitive meaning tuned into a lot of the unseen, whether that means the energy of other people or the energy of a room, or being able to engage or navigate spiritual realms has always kind of been a part of who I was and what was in my awareness. And as I got older, and of course away from the childhood zone where imagination is totally acceptable, it began to look more and more like mental illness. And it did include some pretty extreme mood swings. So what happened is, as I was getting older, things that I didn't think were supposed to be there were there. So this looked like actually seeing some spirits, but having the adult mind to know, wait a second, why am I seeing that? Like nobody else is seeing this. This doesn't seem right, right? And also hearing words, hearing voices. So I remember, distinctly remember being in high school and, sitting in my classroom and like hearing these voices coming through my head and in my ears that were clearly not being spoken anywhere else, nor was anybody else hearing them. And so, it caused this question with like, whoa, this is kind of scary. What's going on here? And, with the culture that I grew up in and that most of us grow up in and navigate here in the US, in our modern Western culture, there's really no way to describe or understand this experience of being tapped into the unseen realms or parts of non ordinary reality. And so, what we do is we often treat it as though there is a problem. And at the same time, there were some problems. I was having trouble really figuring out who I was and how to fit in. And again, partially as a teenager and partially from being a highly sensitive person, I started having these extreme mood swings, right? And so what happened is things kind of got worse and worse, and I finally sought help and was fortunate enough to have a family that was willing to work with me in getting help and work with me in getting the help that felt right for me. And that included going to a few different therapists and counselors first and getting some who weren't going to be the right fit. So that looked like, I actually remember the first counselors, I really still remember the room I went into. It was like, kind of white and had the like neon lights, and there were like sort of just a couple cheesy posters on it. It was just like this like small square room without any windows, and she had this like awful lighting. And we did this little survey, and what was it? And I told her what I was experiencing, that I was hearing and seeing some things, and that I was feeling sad a lot of the time. And then I remember her going through the chart and asking me if I'd ever done drugs, which at the time I think I'd smoked cannabis like once, maybe twice at that time. And based on my chart and having that information, she promptly suggested that maybe I was schizophrenic, which is like, not really. I'm pretty in touch with reality here. And also, that's a pretty big leap to assume because somebody has done drugs once. I think she assumed that it must have been laced with PCP and that was causing my symptoms and blah, blah, blah. So you get the idea. It wasn't until I found the right person for me that things in my life started to make sense. So I finally found the right therapist for me who really took a look at what my whole being, everything that I was experiencing, not just what we're supposed to be like and what reality is supposed to look like for us versus like what's actually happening. And one of the things that we discovered as he put it, is I had a really large antenna. So, not only am I picking up frequencies and things that are outside of myself, whether it's just in the world in general, or, we didn't really at the time talk about spirit realms, but I suspect that he had a level of curiosity in that area, and so he knew not to shut all of that down. And also, I was an intelligent person, so I was processing thoughts and information of things that people much older than me would be thinking about, and didn't have the emotional maturity to understand what it is that I was processing. So this started causing these mood swings. And in the end, now when I meet people and they find out that I was diagnosed bipolar as a young person, they're usually shocked, right? And part of it is because they probably have somebody in their life who is still very much in the trigger and the extreme state of that pattern. What helped me a lot was the practice of mindfulness. So what I learned is oftentimes we get to the depressive side of things, and this is true of anybody, not just someone who is diagnosed with a mental illness, right? We get to something that's sad, or we get to the boring parts of our lives, or we get to a part of the day where we're feeling kind of like and grumpy, and we want to do whatever we can to get out of that state. And so oftentimes we start, making rash decisions, or we go and have another cup of coffee, or eat something that'll amp up our energy, or we go start some drama or talk some shit about somebody, just to kind of stir up that energy, because we start to feel sort of slumpy, right? And what I actually learned is that while many of us try to manage the depressive side of things, what was better for me was learning how to manage the manic side of things. So this is the side and the state that you're in when you often, at least the benefits of it are being highly creative, being really intuitive, being really active, having lots of energy. And so these are all qualities that we view as being really good, right? And so what ends up happening is we find ourselves in those states where we're hyperactive and really excited, and we go with it. And what I learned actually is helping myself to bring myself back into balance when I'm on the extreme up was more direct and beneficial than helping me manage my symptoms when I was on the extreme down. Because what would happen is when I rode that wave of the extreme up, that's actually what was causing the extreme down afterwards. So what I learned to do is when I would find myself getting really amped up, was I would find a way to channel that energy into something productive and calm, or to actually calm my energy back down. That I actually don't need to be hyperactive to be a creative, productive person. Right? And this really helped me find that middle ground and bring my mood back into balance. But of course, this is more than just managing symptoms and managing mood swings. Because in the end, what caused all of this in the first place was that there was a whole part of my being that wasn't getting expressed. And this is often what happens when we find ourselves in depression, is there's a whole part of our being that is not getting expressed, that's either being shut down or shut out from our life and as a person. And so of course, when we have part of who we are not part of the equation, we're not going to be as happy and joy-filled as we would when we have all of our being as meeting the world as who we are. And so it was shortly after I went through this whole ordeal with mental illness, and this included medication. And I will say that although I'm not a supporter of medication, I do feel that it's important sometimes, and one of the best ways that we can use it actually is when people are starting to unravel or get off-centered too far, can help them bring them back to center so that then they can take the steps to move beyond needing medication to be in their center again. I notice a lot of talk on both extremes in this conversation, and in particular from people who have gone through mental illness, who have strong words about against using medication. And although I personally don't, it helped me in a lot of ways to kind of restabilize so I could get grounded again and then make decisions based on what was true for me and not in reaction. It also squashed a lot of who I am and my personality and my gifts, So that was kind of the full spectrum of the thing. And I encourage you to, sit in a place of non-judgment as somebody explores what's right for them, because what's right for you isn't going to be right for everyone. So that being said, shortly after I went through this ordeal was when I found shamanism and began my journey with the shamanic path. And really what the shamanic path helped me do was get in touch with all of these different parts of myself and parts of my being and begin to develop a relationship with them and begin to bring them back to myself so I could meet the world in my wholeness, rather than in my collapse, or rather than meeting the world in a few very carefully selected parts of my personality that I thought were appropriate for the world. So a huge part of who I am is actually that I'm exceptional at traveling through realms, and I have a huge capacity to navigate unseen realms. And I also am highly connected to the spiritual world, to the spirits, and have a way of being able to bring that information into the 3D. In a way, it's partially my job, my role in our great community to do this kind of work. And at the time, in my late teens, early 20s, there was no context for this. So there's this huge part of who I am and a huge part of a gift that I have that at the time I couldn't see how it had a place in society. Not to mention, growing up in a pretty conservative community that was especially reactive to these traits. And what I learned through the process or through the journey with the mental illness world is that these diagnoses are the name that we put on the pattern we're experiencing, but they are not who we are. Right? Just like bipolar was a name for my patterns, swinging from one extreme to the other, bipolar is not who I am. Because I was actively having hearing and seeing things that weren't there that would be described as hallucinations. There was talk about maybe she's in psychosis, right? Detached from reality. But of course, I wasn't detached from reality. I was still, accomplished student and doing pretty well and able to communicate with people in a normal way. But there were just other things happening, and I knew that they were outside of the ordinary, right? So same thing, just like psychosis is the name for the pattern of interacting with non-ordinary reality, it is not who I am. And the same is true for depression. And when we're depressed, we're usually depressed for one of two reasons. Either there's a part of who we are that still hasn't been realized and integrated into the world, and often that's related to our gift. And often our gifts are things that we have created a belief that the world doesn't value. And so our job actually is to get in there and open the pathways so that we can see that they're actually, for ourselves, that our gift actually has value, right? And this is true for people that are sensitive as well, right? When we can feel and sense things that are happening in a room and with other people, sometimes it feels a little bit like a burden. But that's when we take them on as ours to manage, right? When we remember that they're actually not ours to manage, we can release them and let them return to those that they belong to. But we can also use our gift to help people, which is why so many people who are sensitive and empathic and psychic and intuitive find themselves in healing work and coaching careers, because there's a way that they can actually tune in to the energy of another person and help them, see deeper than what they can see for themselves. Right? So one of the main reasons we end up finding ourselves in depression is, when part of who we are isn't realized in the world, part of our being isn't accepted within ourselves even. And then the other reason is often because of unresolved trauma. and this can be buried pretty deep. So there's a sense of, this happens when there's a sense of part of ourselves that gets cut off, but we don't realize that we've cut it off at all. And again, it's usually from some event that's happened in childhood. And I say this a lot, but sometimes we feel like it's only trauma if it's something like really big, that if it's like, sexual violence, or if it's, the death of somebody close to us when we're really young, or being in a really chaotic environment, or alcoholic parents, or something like this. But trauma can be as simple as being unheard when we're a kid, or being ignored, or being laughed at. These actually affect us in the exact same way. And so when we're not aware that that part of who we are from that time has been labeled as bad in our psyche and shoved off into a corner, then part of who we are is missing in the world. And then we end up meeting the world in the way that we think it wants to see us, instead of the way that we truly are. And this can cause us to be depressed, right? And so depression is showing us our pattern, but you are not your depression. So when if you find yourself in this pattern, good. Now you know what's happening. That there's a part of yourself that is not being allowed to be seen by yourself or by others, right? And you can take the steps to recover those parts. Sometimes those parts get so far away from us that we begin to believe we can never actually be good. So we might actually do crazy things or mean things repeatedly, right? We might even do them so much that we actually begin to call in a mental illness diagnosis so that we can tell ourselves that it's not our fault, that this is something that is just who I am, that I'm just fundamentally flawed in my own nature, right? But again, these diagnoses are the name of your pattern. They are not who you are. Western medicine has given us many great things. And it's important to understand also in this work that sometimes a person does just need therapy, right? And I think this is important, especially for us as healers, because sometimes we can get pretty excited about the things that we've seen happen or the things that we know we can do. And so we think it's our job to do it for everyone. And what we want to be careful, and if we want to operate in deep integrity and on a higher level as a healer, our job is actually to help a person realize their own truth rather than doing a thing to them or for them. So sometimes the best thing to do is actually not intervene and let them get professional help from Western medicine. And this is part of an individual's journey, right? And the same is true outside of psychology. The same is true, for medical doctors, right? If I were to break my leg, I would definitely be going to the doctor. I would also probably be going for some energy work and some healing work, because, as we know, our energetic body is closely related to our physical body. It might even be where our physical manifestations originate, from our energetic body. And that doesn't mean that I ignore the physical, right? So I just want to state that, because sometimes we can get so excited about where our healing work has gotten that we can forget that there are still valuable tools within Western medicine that can help us and that can help others. And the best medicine is to incorporate all of them, rather than naming any one given thing as bad or better or worse. We can use the tools from many different places, and that's where we're at right now in our greater picture of civilization is integrating all of these amazing tools that we've discovered by going off on all these separate little journeys and bringing them back into a more holistic understanding of a person and our healing, and of course how that affects the community at large. And the best thing we can do for others is take care of ourselves. And when we take care of ourselves, then we're better able to show up as we truly are, which helps the collective in general. Right? So, in summary, I just want to emphasize again that if you find yourself in relationship with someone who is deep in the heart of experiencing mental illness, one of the best things we can do for them actually is to hold them in their wholeness. So instead of feeling bad for them or wanting them to be fixed or wanting to save them or entertaining their drama, the best thing we can do for them is hold the belief that they too can remember that they are whole, and to allow room for them to explore the different parts of their personality that are wanting to come out. Because it takes practice for all of us, right? When we reconnect to a part of who we are, it might be a little awkward when it comes out at first. And so we want to give each other grace to play around with reconnecting to these parts and figuring out where we can meet them in an authentic way. And if you're finding yourself in the pattern of mental illness, you can give yourself the same, giving yourself grace and continuing to inquire, what is the part of me that I haven't allowed to come out and meet the world yet, and is wanting to be seen and heard and understood and included in the conversation. And it's not your fault. It's no one's fault. It is our responsibility to take care of ourselves and tend ourselves. And again, we're all navigating this piece of post-colonialism where we've separated the individual from nature. And we decided that hierarchy is the best way and that conquering is the best way, right? And so as we're navigating, moving back into a holistic way of being with the earth and each other, give yourself some grace. Because many of us aren't yet there. We're still actively working to recreate and remember the way of being in sacred circle with one another. And while we're in that process, there's going to be some road bumps. There are going to be times when we still feel like we can't let all of who we are out. And there's going to be times where we still have to pay our bills and do the things that we need to do to survive and thrive, right? And so remembering this is all part of the reintegration process that we're in together right now. And these are my words for you. Bye-bye for now, and talk to you soon.